Good evening. Coming to you a bit later this evening. A beautiful, afternoon in Tampa, Florida. So I just want to talk a little today about what's happening right now in real time. That's kind of a prelude to what will happen in the last days. When you look in Revelation chapter 6, verse 5, it talks about the rider on the black horse, and that was a representation of scarcity that's going to be on the earth. And it picks up in verse 5 saying, uh, he there was a rider on a black horse, and the rider had two scales in his hand. And the four living creatures yelled out a phrase, and they said, a a denarius for a quart of wheat, and a denarius for 3 quarts of barley, and don't harm the oil in the wine. So what that was referring to was just economic scarcity and something we're dealing with right now, which is called inflation. So right now, inflation is at a 40-year high. And what inflation basically means in the simplest term, what inflation is the erosion of the buying power of your dollar. So I'll give you an example. If you were able to take a dollar and go to the fruit stand and buy 6 bananas, now you can only buy 3 bananas or 2 bananas. So that's what inflation does. And what the federal government is doing, because I said before, the government is part of the beast system. So what the government is trying to do is, what is their job, is to regulate the economy. And one way they are regulating the economy is by raising interest rates. Because if you raise interest rates, then what you're doing is you're trying to slow the economy down. And why is it that the government is trying to slow the economy down? The reason why it's trying to slow the economy down because we have more demand than we have supply. And a lot of that is fueled by a couple factors. One would be the coronavirus and the effects that we have on the coronavirus. We do not have enough laborers in the market to actually help suppliers pretty much meet demand. We still have trailers that's sitting in the docks, and it's not because the product is just there. It's just that they don't have the drivers because we just don't have the labor force. So whenever you have a rising demand, and then a rising demand with a short supply is going to actually create higher prices. And whenever you have higher prices and you have wages that are not raising with inflation, with the higher prices, then you have inflation. So that's what the government is trying to do right now. And in this scenario, I was talking about how biblical it talked about. It just gave the comparison where it was showing that a denarius at that day was a wage paid. So that wage paid was only able to buy 1 quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. Where if it was just in regular terms, you would probably be able to buy 10 times as much of that with a wage, a living wage, or your wage that you made for going out and working all day. And that's what we're into now. So one thing we're going to do is talk a little about inflation and how, as just everyday people and Christian people, how do we navigate through inflation? So first, again, I said, what causes inflation? Inflation is caused when you have higher prices, and then you have wages that are not consistent with the higher prices. So there's a couple ways where what we're going to have to do. But one thing, you have to be very, very frugal and very, very responsible with your spending. As far as if you have a mortgage, whenever you have inflation and you have a mortgage, that's great for you. And the reason why it's great for you if you have a fixed mortgage, because now you're able to, since the dollar is devalued, you're actually paying less back because the dollar is not as valuable as it was before. And especially if you have rising, if your income raises with inflation. So now you have more money to actually pay down that fixed debt. Where you run into the problem is when you have the new buyers out there, because they're going to pay a lot more on interest rates. So it's going to cost them more to actually to get into a new home. It's going to cost you more if you actually go out to buy a car or refinance your home because of the interest rate. Now on the corporate side, the corporate side loves that because now if I can raise my prices, I can also make profits by selling less. So that's kind of a benefit really, really for them. So we're in a delicate balance right now, and the reason why the Feds are doing what they what they what they are doing is raising interest rate because they're trying to slow the economy. Um, uh, I would say the Fed wants our inflation to be about 2%. Right now we're staggered around 7%. So we really need to get that inflation really back down to where it needs to be. And you have to be careful when you slow the economy down because you don't want to get into what they call stagflation. Now, stagflation is something that is just awful because when you have stagflation, you have slow economic growth. You have the wages are not growing, and then you also have high employment. So you definitely don't want to really do that because that's the worst scenario that we want to go into. So you get into a delicate balance. And on the second part of that, they said, do not harm the oil and the wine. And what is the significance of the oil and the wine? The oil and the wine represented God's protection. So what God is saying during those times, although there will come a time where there's scarcity, although there will come a time where supply and demand is short, and then although there will come a time where the monetary policy is out of whack, but just rest assured that God says, just as in times before, that he is going to go out there and protect his people and seal his people, he will do the same thing during these times. But the most important thing we need to do is just make sure we are responsible. Just make sure you're responsible of paying down the debt. Make sure you're responsible if you have to purchase something that's a large ticket item. Just make sure you pay attention to your finances coming up in the next couple of months, because they're saying we may be looking at a 3-year trend where you have inflation. And the great thing about inflation with the banks, so what they're trying to do more than anything else, whenever you have inflation and you have rising interest costs, make sure you can just check with your banks, because sometimes you can get really decent CD rates. Right now, CD rates are 0.5% of 1%, some crazy number. If inflation continue to rise, if you can get a CD at 3% or 2.5%, go ahead and lock that in. But I wouldn't lock it in for more than 60 months. If you can lock it in for 12 months, because if inflation does continue to rise above the 7% where it is now, and it goes up to 8%, 9%, 10%, then all that's going to mean is it's going to cost more to actually borrow. Inflation rates will go up, and the CDs will actually go up in proportion with the interest rates. So I know this was a lesson where it was some of the end times, but it's just one thing I want to just talk about was just physical spending and how you can navigate through that during these times. Have a wonderful afternoon.